Christmas dinner turned into a nightmare when my brother Derek slammed his fist on the table and declared I had 1 week to pack my bags and leave our family home. Mom and Dad sat frozen, avoiding my eyes as Derek smirked with pure satisfaction. He thought he had finally won our lifelong rivalry. But what he didn't know was that 6 months ago I had quietly purchased this house from our cash-strapped parents using my tech startup money. I reached into my purse and pulled out the property deed. The tension in our dining room felt thick enough to cut with a knife as Derek leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with the smugness of someone who believed he held all the winning cards. His announcement had caught everyone off guard, but what really stung was the calculated way he delivered it. Right after we had finished saying grace and started passing around Mom's famous green bean casserole. I should probably explain how we got to this point. My name is Agatha, and I am 28 years old, working as a software engineer who got lucky when my mobile app company sold to a major tech corporation 2 years ago. The buyout gave me financial freedom I never expected to have at such a young age, but it also created an uncomfortable dynamic with my family, especially with Derek. My older brother had always been the golden child growing up. At 31, Derek was supposed to be the success story, the one who would carry on the family name and make our parents proud. Instead, he had spent the last decade bouncing between failed business ventures and get-rich-quick schemes. His latest incarnation as a car salesman at a used auto lot downtown was barely keeping him afloat, and everyone knew it. Our parents, Robert and Linda, were both in their mid-60s and struggling more than they let on. Dad had suffered a massive heart attack 18 months ago, and the medical bills combined with his reduced disability income had created a financial crisis nobody talked about openly. Mom worked part-time at a local boutique, but her wages barely covered groceries, let alone the mounting expenses. I had been living in my childhood bedroom for the past 2 years. Not because I couldn't afford my own place, but because I was working on my next tech venture and enjoyed being close to family. The arrangement worked well for everyone, or so I thought. I contributed to household expenses informally and helped with Dad's medical appointments and physical therapy sessions. Derek had moved back home 6 months ago after his messy divorce from his ex-wife Sarah. The split had been expensive and bitter, involving custody battles over their 8-year-old son Tommy and disputes over property division. Derek claimed Sarah had taken him to the cleaners, though I suspected there was more to the story than he shared with us. Tonight, he had brought his new girlfriend Stephanie to our traditional Christmas Eve dinner. She was an attractive woman in her early 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive handbag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. From the moment she walked through the door, Stephanie had been surveying our modest home with the critical eye of someone mentally calculating renovation costs. Derek's bombshell announcement came right as we were settling into our meal. He stood up suddenly, tapping his wineglass with his fork to get everyone's attention, like he was making some kind of wedding toast. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority he had perfected over the years. "Stephanie and I have been talking, and we have decided it is time for this family to make some changes." He gestured around the dining room where we had shared countless family meals over the years. The wallpaper was outdated, and the furniture showed its age, but this room held decades of memories, from birthday celebrations to graduation dinners to holiday gatherings just like this one. As the eldest son, Derek continued, puffing out his chest slightly. "I think it is my responsibility to help Mom and Dad transition into their retirement years properly. Stephanie and I are prepared to take over the household responsibilities and modernize this place." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair while Mom kept her eyes fixed on her plate, moving food around with her fork without actually eating anything. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though something in my stomach was already twisting with dread. Derek's smirk widened. I am suggesting that it is time for you to find your own place, little sister. Stephanie and I are going to be living here permanently, and frankly, three adults sharing one house is getting a bit crowded. The casual cruelty in his voice hit me like a physical blow. He was not just asking me to move out, he was dismissing me from my own family home like I was some kind of unwelcome house guest who had overstayed her welcome. Rix, Mom finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should discuss this privately after dinner. No, Mom, Derek replied firmly. I think we have been dancing around this issue long enough. Agatha makes plenty of money from her computer business. She can afford to rent a nice apartment somewhere. Meanwhile, Stephanie and I are ready to start a family and build a life here. Stephanie nodded enthusiastically, finally speaking up for the first time since Derek's announcement. We have already been looking at some renovation ideas, she said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what appeared to be a Pinterest board filled with home improvement photos. This house has so much potential, but it really needs updating to meet modern standards. I felt my cheeks burning with humiliation as she began describing their plans as if I had already vanished from the picture. The casual way she dismissed years of family history and memories made my hands clench into fists under the table. Derek seemed to feed off my obvious distress, his confidence growing with each passing moment. Look, Agatha, I know this might seem sudden, but you have to understand the bigger picture here. Mom and Dad need someone who can really take care of them as they get older. Someone who understands responsibility and family obligations. The implication was clear. He was the responsible one, the family man, while I was just a selfish career woman who had been taking advantage of their generosity. Never mind that I had been the one driving Dad to his cardiology appointments or helping Mom with her grocery shopping when her arthritis flared up. You have 1 week, Derek said, his voice taking on a tone of finality. I think that is more than fair. The silence that followed Derek's ultimatum felt like it stretched on for an eternity. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away to the seconds while steam rose from the untouched plates of food growing cold on our table. The Christmas tree lights in the living room cast colorful reflections on the dining room wall, creating a festive backdrop that felt completely at odds with the toxic atmosphere Derek had created. Stephanie took Derek's pause as her cue to jump into the conversation with an enthusiasm that made my skin crawl. She set her phone on the table and began scrolling through image after image of renovated homes, each one more expensive looking than the last. I have been planning this for weeks, she said, her voice bright with excitement. Derek told me about the house's potential, and I just knew we could transform this place into something really special. She turned the phone toward Mom and Dad, who leaned in reluctantly to look at her curated collection of design inspiration. I caught glimpses of gleaming marble countertops, subway tile backsplashes, and open-concept living spaces that bore no resemblance to our cozy family home. This kitchen renovation would be our first priority, Stephanie continued, gesturing toward our modest galley kitchen, visible through the doorway. We could knock out that wall and create a beautiful island workspace. I already have 3 contractors lined up to give us estimates right after New Year's Day. My stomach dropped. She was not just daydreaming about hypothetical renovations. She had already been making concrete plans, scheduling appointments, and moving forward as if my displacement was a foregone conclusion. Derek nodded approvingly as Stephanie launched into increasingly detailed descriptions of their vision. The master bedroom upstairs obviously needs a complete overhaul, she said. We are thinking about expanding into that small bedroom next door to create a proper walk-in closet and maybe a sitting area. She was talking about my childhood bedroom, the space I had occupied for the past 2 years, as if it were nothing more than unused square footage to be absorbed into their grand renovation plans. The casual dismissal of my existence felt like a knife twisting in my chest. And downstairs, Derek added, warming to the topic, we could finish the basement properly and turn it into a real entertainment space, maybe a home theater or a game room where I could host poker nights with the guys. I found my voice, though it came out shakier than I wanted. You are talking about completely changing everything. This house has been in our family for 30 years. It holds decades of memories for all of us. Derek rolled his eyes in a way that reminded me of every childhood argument we had ever had. Memories do not pay the bills, Agatha. This house needs serious updating if it is going to maintain any value. Stephanie has a degree in interior design, so she knows what she is talking about. And actually, Stephanie interjected with a bright smile, I took some classes at the community college, but my real expertise comes from watching renovation shows and following design influencers on social media. The admission should have been embarrassing, but she delivered it with complete confidence, as if her Pinterest boards and reality TV education qualified her to gut our family home and rebuild it according to her personal aesthetic preferences. She flipped to another section of her phone, revealing detailed floor plans sketched over photos of our current layout. I have been measuring rooms and taking notes during my visits here. The living room could be so much more functional if we removed some of these interior walls and created better flow patterns. Mom finally found her voice, though she spoke carefully like someone navigating a minefield. Stephanie, dear, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but some of these changes sound quite expensive. We would need to think about budgets and priorities. Oh, do not worry about the money, Derek said with a dismissive wave of his hand. I have been talking to some people about financing options. There are renovation loans specifically designed for situations like this. He pulled out a folder I had not noticed him carrying and spread several documents across the table, pushing aside our dinner plates to make room. The papers appeared to be loan applications and contractor estimates, suggesting this conversation had been planned well in advance. I've already been in touch with a mortgage broker who specializes in family property transfers, Derek continued. The process is actually pretty straightforward when you have a willing buyer and seller within the same family. Dad's face had gone pale, and I could see him struggling to process what Derek was suggesting. Son, I think you might be moving a little fast here. Your mother and I have not agreed to sell the house or take on any new debt. Derek's expression hardened slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the manipulative tactics he had perfected over the years. Dad, I know you and Mom have been struggling financially since your health problems started. I am offering to help you solve those problems permanently. He opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be a credit report and a stack of medical bills. My parents' faces filled with shame as Derek began reading numbers aloud, itemizing their debts with cruel precision. Between the hospital bills, the credit cards you maxed out during Dad's recovery, and the back taxes you owe from cashing out his retirement fund early, you are looking at about $47,000 in total debt, Derek said matter-of-factly. That is not including the ongoing mortgage payments or the interest that keeps accumulating every month. Linda's eyes filled with tears as Derek exposed their financial vulnerabilities in front of Stephanie and me. I had known money was tight, but I had not realized the extent of their crisis or how deeply it was affecting their sense of dignity and security. I am offering to take over all of those obligations, Derek continued, his voice taking on the tone of a generous benefactor. I will handle the mortgage payments, pay off the outstanding debts, and make sure you both have a comfortable living situation for your retirement years. On the surface, his proposal sounded reasonable, even generous, but I could hear the underlying control and manipulation in every word. Derek was not offering to help our parents. He was positioning himself to take ownership of their home while making them feel grateful for his intervention. Stephanie nodded enthusiastically. It really is the perfect solution for everyone. Your parents get financial relief, Derek and I get a beautiful home to renovate and start our family, and Agatha gets the push she needs to establish her independence. The way she described my forced displacement as some kind of favor made my blood boil. She was painting me as a spoiled adult child who needed tough love to become self-sufficient, when the reality was that I had been quietly helping my family in ways none of them seemed to recognize or appreciate. "Oh, think about it logically," Derek said, directing his words at me, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You make more money than the rest of us combined. You do not need to live here for financial reasons. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad are drowning in debt, and I am the only one offering a real solution to their problems." He leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he had just delivered an unassailable argument. "You have 1 week to find a new place and move out. I think that is more than generous considering the circumstances." The weight of Derek's words settled over our dining room like a heavy blanket, smothering any remaining traces of Christmas warmth and family togetherness. I watched my father's hands tremble slightly as he reached for his water glass, and my mother continued staring at her plate as if she could somehow disappear into the pattern of our old china. Derek was not finished with his presentation. He pulled more documents from his folders, spreading them across the table with the systematic precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment multiple times. The Christmas centerpiece Mom had spent hours arranging that morning was pushed aside to make room for bank statements, collection notices, and medical bills that painted a devastating picture of my parents' financial reality. "I know this is uncomfortable to discuss," Derek said, though his tone suggested he was actually enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "But I think it is time we all face the truth about what has been happening in this family." He held up a collection notice from the regional medical center where Dad had received his cardiac care. The amount due was staggering even after insurance coverage. "This is just from the emergency room visit," Derek explained. "It does not include the cardiologist fees, the cardiac catheterization procedure, the medication costs, or the follow-up appointments." Linda flinched as if Derek had slapped her. "How did you get copies of our medical bills?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Derek's smile had a cruel edge to it. "I have been helping answer the phone when you were not home, Mom. Collection agencies call at all hours of the day. I started keeping track of who was calling and why." He produced a notebook filled with his handwriting, documenting dates, times, and amounts owed to various creditors. The level of detail was impressive and deeply invasive. Derek had been systematically cataloging our parents' financial distress like some kind of debt collector. The credit card statements were easier to find. He continued pulling out several monthly statements that had clearly been opened and examined. Dad left them in his desk drawer, probably thinking nobody would go through his personal papers. Robert's face flushed red with a combination of anger and embarrassment. "You had no right to go through my private financial information," he said, his voice gaining strength as his protective instincts kicked in. "I had every right as a concerned son who wants to help his family," Derek replied smoothly. "Besides, it is pretty hard to ignore the problem when creditors are calling the house 3 times a day and leaving threatening voicemails." He pressed play on his phone, and we all heard a recorded message from a debt collection agency demanding immediate payment on an overdue credit card balance. The automated voice was cold and impersonal, threatening legal action if the account was not brought current within 10 business days. "That was yesterday's message," Derek said. "There were 2 more just like it this morning." Stephanie leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine sympathy, though something about her expression felt calculated and rehearsed. "I cannot imagine how stressful this must be for you both. Derek told me about your health scare, Robert, and I know medical emergencies can destroy even the most careful financial planning." Her words sounded supportive, but they also served to reinforce Derek's narrative that our parents were helpless victims who needed rescue from their irresponsible spending and poor planning. Derek pulled out another set of documents that made my heart sink. "The property tax situation is probably the most urgent issue," he said, pointing to official-looking notices from the county assessor's office. "They are already 6 months behind, and if they miss another payment, the county can start foreclosure proceedings." Dad's shoulders sagged as the full scope of their crisis became clear. The medical emergency had not just drained their savings. It had created a cascading series of financial problems that were now threatening their ability to keep their home. The retirement account withdrawal helped temporarily, Derek continued, but the early withdrawal penalties and tax implications created a whole new set of problems. The IRS wants their cut, and they do not offer payment plans that work with a fixed disability income. He showed us copies of tax documents that revealed Dad had been forced to cash out his modest retirement savings to pay for medical expenses not covered by insurance. The decision had provided temporary relief, but created long-term tax obligations that were now coming due. Add it all up, Derek said, producing a calculator and punching in numbers with theatrical flair. And you're looking at $47,236 in total outstanding debt. That number grows every month with interest, late fees, and ongoing medical costs. The precise figure hit our family like a physical blow. Seeing their financial crisis reduced to a specific dollar amount made the situation feel both more real and more overwhelming. Now I know what you are thinking, Derek said, directing his attention to me. You are probably wondering why I know so much about Mom and Dad's finances when you apparently had no idea any of this was happening. His accusation stung because it contained an uncomfortable grain of truth. I had been so focused on my own business ventures and career goals that I had failed to recognize the extent of my parents' struggles. I knew money was tight, but I had assumed their situation was manageable. The difference between us, Derek continued, is that I have been paying attention to what really matters. I have been here answering phone calls, opening mail, and dealing with the day-to-day reality of this family's problems. Meanwhile, you have been living in your own little bubble pretending everything was fine as long as you could keep working on your computer projects. His words were designed to make me feel guilty and selfish, and unfortunately, they were partially effective. I had been contributing to household expenses in small ways, but I had not grasped the full scope of the financial emergency my parents were facing. That is why my solution makes perfect sense, Derek said, his voice taking on the confident tone of a salesman closing a deal. I will take over the mortgage payments immediately. I will consolidate all the outstanding debts into a single manageable loan. I will handle the property taxes and make sure all the bills get paid on time every month. He produced what appeared to be a loan application that had already been partially completed. The mortgage broker I have been working with specializes in family property transfers. With my income from the dealership and Stephanie's savings, we can qualify for a loan that covers the existing mortgage balance plus the outstanding debts. Stephanie nodded enthusiastically, pulling out her own folder of financial documents. I have been saving for years to buy a house, she said. This would be perfect because we get a home that already has character and history. Plus, we can customize it exactly the way we want. Dad looked overwhelmed by the complexity of Derek's proposal. Son, I appreciate that you want to help, but this sounds like a major financial commitment. Are you sure you understand what you would be taking on? Dad, I have been thinking about this for months, Derek replied. I make good money selling cars and the market has been strong lately. Stephanie has a steady income from her retail management job, plus she has inheritance money from her grandmother that she has been looking to invest. The pieces of Derek's plan were starting to come together, and I could see how he had positioned himself as the family's financial savior while simultaneously engineering my removal from the house. It was a complex manipulation that addressed our parents' real needs while serving his own interests. The beauty of this arrangement, Derek continued, is that Mom and Dad would not have to move or change their lifestyle at all. They would continue living here exactly as they always have, but without the stress of mortgage payments or debt collectors calling every day. He made it sound like a generous gift, but I could see the subtle power dynamics at play. Our parents would go from being homeowners to being dependent on Derek's continued goodwill and financial stability. If his income changed or his relationship with Stephanie ended, they would have no legal protection or security. What about me? I asked, though I already suspected what Derek's answer would be. What about you? He replied with a shrug. You have a successful business money in the bank and complete freedom to live wherever you want. Most people would consider that a pretty enviable situation. He gestured around our modest dining room as if it were some kind of prison I should be grateful to escape. Besides, is not it time you started building your own life instead of hiding out in your childhood bedroom? You are 28 years old, Agatha. Do not you think it is time to grow up? The condescension in Derek's voice was the final straw that broke through my shock and confusion. I had been sitting there absorbing his financial revelations and manipulative arguments, feeling increasingly guilty about my perceived selfishness and inattention to my family's struggles. But his suggestion that I was somehow immature or hiding from adult responsibilities ignited a fire inside me that burned away my self-doubt. I reached for my purse, which was hanging on the back of my chair, and pulled out my smartphone. Derek watched with curious amusement, probably expecting me to call someone for emotional support or start searching for apartment listings to prove my compliance with his ultimatum. Instead, I opened my banking app and began scrolling through months of transaction history. The records I was looking for were all there, documented with the precision that comes from automated electronic payments and careful financial planning. You know what, Derek, I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time since this confrontation began. You are absolutely right that someone in this family has not been paying attention to what really matters. But it is not me. I turned my phone screen toward the table so everyone could see the bank transfer records I was displaying. Let me share some financial information that might surprise you. Derek's confident expression began to shift as I started reading dates and amounts aloud. November 15th, electronic transfer to Keystone Mortgage Company, $1,467. November 1st, payment to Metropolitan Electric, $238. October 28th, payment to Municipal Water Authority, $89. Mom and Dad leaned forward, their eyes widening as they recognized the amounts and companies I was naming. These were their household bills, the monthly expenses that had somehow been mysteriously manageable despite their financial crisis. October 15th, payment to Keystone Mortgage Company, $1,467. I continued. October 1st, payment to Metropolitan Electric, $212. September 28th, payment to Municipal Water Authority, $84. I kept scrolling back through the months, revealing a consistent pattern of payments that covered every major household expense. Derek's smug expression was slowly morphing into confusion as he struggled to process what I was showing them. August 15th, payment to Keystone Mortgage Company. July 15th, payment to Keystone Mortgage Company. June 15th, payment to Keystone Mortgage Company. I continued establishing the pattern that had been in place for the better part of a year. "Oh, what are you trying to prove?" Derek asked, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I am trying to prove that someone in this family has actually been paying attention and taking action," I replied. "Someone has been quietly handling the financial crisis you just spent 20 minutes describing in excruciating detail." I switched to a different section of my banking app and pulled up additional transaction categories. Liberty Auto Insurance, $632 paid quarterly for the past 8 months. Johnson Home Repair, $850 for the heating system repair in September. Cascade Roofing Solutions, $1,200 for the leak repair in July. Linda's hands flew to her mouth as the realization hit her. "Agatha, are you saying that you have been paying everything?" I finished for her. "The mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, the emergency repairs, even the groceries half the time. I have been covering this family's basic living expenses for the past 8 months through an automated payment service." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching panic as he began to understand the implications of what I was revealing. "That is impossible," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "If you were paying all these bills, Mom and Dad would have known about it. They would have told me." I looked at my parents with a mixture of love and gentle reproach. Actually, they did not know. I specifically set up the payments through a third-party service so the money would appear to come from an anonymous benefactor rather than directly from my accounts. Dad's eyes filled with tears as he processed what I was telling them. The mortgage company told us that someone had been making payments on our behalf, but they said they could not reveal who was doing it due to privacy regulations. The utility companies said the same thing. Mom added, her voice shaking with emotion. "We thought maybe it was some kind of church charity or community assistance program." Derek was frantically trying to process this new information and figure out how it affected his carefully constructed narrative. "Even if that is true," he said, "it does not change the fact that you have been living here rent-free while Mom and Dad struggled with debt." "Actually, it changes everything," I replied, switching to another section of my banking app, because paying the basic living expenses was just the beginning. I pulled up records of larger transactions that painted an even more comprehensive picture of my financial support. Harris Medical Center payment plan arrangement, $500 per month for 18 months. Regional Cardiology Associates, $325 per month for 12 months. Mercy Pharmacy, automatic payment setup for Dad's prescription medications. Each revelation hit Derek like a physical blow, dismantling his portrayal of me as a selfish freeloader who had been taking advantage of our parents' generosity. I also handled the property tax situation. I continued showing them a large lump sum payment that had brought the account current, $6,842 paid in full 3 months ago to prevent any foreclosure proceedings. Robert was openly crying now, overwhelmed by the realization that his daughter had been their anonymous guardian angel throughout the most difficult period of their lives. "Why did you not tell us?" Linda asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Why did you let us think we were managing on our own?" "Because I knew how important your independence and dignity were to you," I replied, squeezing her fingers gently. "I knew if you realized I was paying your bills, you would feel embarrassed and try to refuse my help. This way you could stay in your home and maintain your sense of self-reliance while I made sure you were safe and secure." Derek was still struggling to rebuild his argument in the face of these revelations. "Okay, fine, maybe you have been helping with some expenses, but that does not give you the right to live here indefinitely. Stephanie and I still want to start our family here, and we still think it makes sense for you to get your own place." His persistence in the face of overwhelming evidence of his own ignorance and my genuine generosity was almost impressive in its shamelessness. Besides, he continued grasping for any remaining threads of his original position. "All this just proves that you can afford to live anywhere you want. You obviously have plenty of money to throw around." Stephanie had been unusually quiet during my financial revelations, but now she spoke up with obvious discomfort. "Derek, maybe we should reconsider our timeline. If Agatha has been helping your parents this much, perhaps we should discuss this more as a family." It was the first crack in Derek's support system, and I could see him starting to panic as his carefully orchestrated plan began to crumble. He had expected to walk into this dinner as the conquering hero solving everyone's problems while establishing his dominance over our family dynamics. Instead, he was being exposed as someone who had completely misunderstood the situation he was trying to control. "Oh, look," I said, deciding it was time to end his flailing attempts to regain control of the narrative. "I think there are some things about this family's finances that you do not understand as well as you think you do." I pulled up one final set of banking records, the ones that would completely reframe everything Derek thought he knew about our parents' situation and my role in their lives. "But before we go any further," I continued, Maybe you should explain something to me. How exactly did you get access to all those private financial documents you have been waving around? Because as far as I know, Mom and Dad never gave you permission to open their mail or access their credit reports. Derek's face went pale as he realized his methods of gathering information might not look as noble and helpful as he had been portraying them. Derek's face had turned an alarming shade of red as he fumbled for an explanation about how he had obtained our parents' private financial information. But before he could formulate a response, I decided it was time to reveal the information that would completely reshape this entire conversation. Actually, I said, setting my phone down on the table with deliberate calm. There is something else we need to discuss before we go any further with this conversation about who lives where and who pays for what. I reached into my purse again, this time pulling out a manila folder that I had been carrying with me for months, waiting for the right moment to share its contents with my family. That moment had clearly arrived. 6 months ago, I began opening the folder to reveal a stack of legal documents. When I first learned about the extent of Mom and Dad's financial crisis, I spoke with my accountant and my lawyer about the best way to help them without creating tax implications or jeopardizing their retirement benefits. Derek leaned forward, trying to read the documents from across the table. "What are you talking about?" he asked, though something in his voice suggested he was beginning to suspect that his grand plan was about to encounter a major obstacle. "I am talking about a legal solution to the financial problems you just spent half an hour describing," I replied, pulling out the most important document in the folder. "This is a deed transfer that was executed and filed with the county clerk's office 6 months ago. The document was official looking, with multiple signatures, notary seals, and legal language that made its purpose unmistakably clear. I held it up so everyone at the table could see the header that read, 'Warranty Deed, Transfer of Real Property.' On June 15th of this year," I continued, "Robert and Linda Henderson sold this house to Agatha Marie Henderson for the sum of $47,000. Which was the exact amount needed to pay off all their outstanding debts." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the furnace clicking on in the basement. Derek's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound, while my parents stared at the deed with expressions of dawning recognition. "Wait a minute," Mom said slowly. "Those papers we signed in June, the ones you said were for refinancing and debt consolidation, were actually a property sale," I finished gently. "My lawyer structured the transaction to provide you with enough money to pay off every debt you owed, while allowing you to continue living here as my tenants for as long as you want." I pulled out additional documents that showed the complete financial transaction. The $47,000 purchase price went directly to your creditors. The medical bills, credit card balances, property taxes, and IRS obligations were all paid in full on the day we closed. Dad was staring at the paperwork with tears streaming down his face. "You bought our house," he whispered. "You actually bought our house to save us from losing it." "I bought it because I love you both and because I could not stand the thought of you losing your home due to circumstances beyond your control," I replied. "And I structured it so you could stay here with dignity, paying nominal rent and maintaining your independence." Derek had finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "This is impossible. You cannot just buy someone's house without them knowing about it." "Actually, you can," I said, pulling out more documentation. "When the sellers are fully informed, represented by independent counsel, and entering into the agreement voluntarily to solve a financial crisis." I showed them copies of correspondence from the law firm that had represented my parents separately from my own attorney. Mom and Dad had their own lawyer review every aspect of this transaction. They understood exactly what they were agreeing to. Linda nodded slowly, the memory returning to her. "We thought you were helping us reorganize our debts and get better payment terms. The lawyer explained that the house would be used as collateral, but we did not realize." That I was actually purchasing it outright, I finished. I asked the attorneys to explain it in terms of debt restructuring because I knew if you understood you were selling your home to your own daughter, you would refuse the help out of pride. I pulled out the rental agreement that had been executed simultaneously with the property sale. You are not homeless or dependent on anyone's charity. You are tenants with a lifetime lease that cannot be broken or modified without your consent. The rental terms were incredibly generous, $100 per month, no security deposit, and a clause that granted them exclusive use of the property for as long as they chose to live there. It was essentially a legal fiction designed to preserve their dignity while ensuring their security. Derek was frantically examining the documents, looking for some flaw or loophole that would invalidate what I was showing them. "This has to be some kind of elder abuse," he said desperately. "You took advantage of their medical crisis to steal their house for below market value." Actually, I replied calmly, the purchase price was determined by 3 independent appraisals that took into account the property's condition and the urgent timeline required to prevent foreclosure. I showed him the appraisal reports, each one confirming that $47,000 was a fair market price for a modest 3-bedroom house in our neighborhood that needed significant updating and repairs. More importantly, I continued, I actually overpaid according to recent comparable sales. The average price for similar properties in this area over the past 6 months has been closer to $39,000. Stephanie had been unusually quiet during this revelation, but now she spoke up with obvious concern. "Derek, if Agatha owns the house, then all our renovation plans are irrelevant," I finished for her, "because Derek has no legal standing to authorize any changes to a property he does not own." The full implications of the situation were finally sinking in for everyone at the table. Derek's elaborate scheme to position himself as the family's financial savior had been based on a completely false understanding of our parents' current legal and financial status. "But they are still in debt," Derek protested, grasping for any remaining argument. "Even if you paid off their old bills, they still have ongoing expenses they cannot afford." "Which is why I have been paying all the household expenses for the past 8 months, I reminded him. "The mortgage payment comes to me now since I own the house. The utilities, insurance, and maintenance costs are my responsibility as the property owner." I pulled out the final set of documents that showed the complete financial picture. Mom and Dad's only monthly obligations are their personal expenses, like food, clothing, and Dad's medical copays. Their Social Security and disability income more than covers those costs. "So they are completely debt-free and financially stable," I continued. "They have no mortgage payment, no utility bills, no property taxes, and no collection agencies calling. They can live comfortably on their fixed income for the rest of their lives." Robert was openly sobbing now, overwhelmed by gratitude and relief. "You saved us," he said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. "We thought we were going to lose everything, and you saved us." Derek looked like someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. His entire power play had been based on the assumption that our parents were desperate and that he was their only hope for financial rescue. Learning that their problems had been solved months ago and that I was actually their landlord completely destroyed his position. "This does not change anything," he said, though his voice lacked any conviction. "Stephanie and I still want to live here and start our family. We can pay you rent just as easily as we could have paid Mom and Dad." I looked at him with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "Derek, even if I were willing to consider that arrangement, which I am not, you would still need to explain how you got access to financial information that belonged to people who are now my tenants." The question hung in the air like a sword, ready to cut through whatever remaining credibility Derek thought he still possessed. His methods of gathering information about our parents' debts were looking increasingly questionable now that the legal ownership of the house had been clarified. Derek's face cycled through several emotions as he processed the complete collapse of his carefully constructed plan. I could see him mentally scrambling, trying to find some angle or argument that would salvage his position or at least allow him to save face in front of Stephanie and our parents. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of desperation that I had never heard from him before. "You know what, Agatha? I think you are the one who needs to answer some questions here." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a harsh sound that made everyone else at the table flinch. "This whole arrangement sounds incredibly suspicious to me. You took advantage of elderly parents during a medical crisis to acquire their property for a fraction of its value." I could see him grasping for any narrative that would make me the villain, instead of exposing his own ignorance and manipulation. How do we know this was not some elaborate scheme you planned from the beginning? Maybe you even sabotaged their finances to create the crisis that allowed you to swoop in and steal their house. The accusation was so outrageous that I almost laughed, but the serious expression on Derek's face told me he was committed to this new strategy. He was going to paint himself as a protective son who had uncovered his sister's predatory behavior. Think about it. Derek continued, warming to his theme as he paced around our dining room. Agatha makes all this money from her computer business, but she chooses to live at home with mom and dad. She has access to all their financial information, knows exactly when they are most vulnerable, and then conveniently appears with a solution that benefits her more than anyone else. Stephanie looked uncomfortable as Derek's accusations became increasingly wild, but she did not try to stop him or distance herself from his claims. "Derek might have a point," she said reluctantly. "The timing does seem awfully convenient." Derek pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. "I think it is time we got some professional advice about this situation. I have been talking to a lawyer who specializes in elder financial abuse cases." My stomach tightened as I realized Derek was serious about pursuing legal action. Even though his accusations were baseless, the mere fact that he was willing to involve lawyers and make formal complaints could create problems for me and my parents. "His name is Marcus Weinstein." Derek continued, finding the contact he was looking for. "He handles cases where adult children manipulate elderly parents into signing over property or financial assets." He pressed the call button and put his phone on speaker mode, apparently intent on having this conversation in front of our entire family. The phone rang 3 times before a professional-sounding voice answered. "Marcus Weinstein, attorney at law. How can I help you this evening?" "Marcus, this is Derek Henderson. We spoke last week about my family situation. I'm calling because we have discovered some new information that I think you need to hear." "Of course, Derek. What have you learned?" Derek glanced around the table with an expression of grim satisfaction. "It turns out my sister has been manipulating my elderly parents' finances for months. She somehow convinced them to sell her their house for far below market value during a medical crisis." "That does sound concerning," Marcus replied, his voice taking on the careful tone lawyers use when they sense potential litigation. "Were your parents represented by independent counsel during this transaction?" I have no idea," Derek admitted, "but the whole thing was done in secret. My parents did not even understand they were selling their house until tonight." I could see where this was heading, and I knew I needed to intervene before Derek's lies created legal complications that would be expensive and time-consuming to resolve. "Actually," I said loudly enough for the lawyer to hear me through the speakerphone, "my parents were represented by the law firm of Patterson Rodriguez and Associates. The transaction was reviewed by the county clerk's office, and all required waiting periods and disclosure requirements were followed to the letter." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I see. And you are the sister who allegedly engaged in this financial manipulation." "I am the daughter who purchased my parents' home to prevent them from losing it to foreclosure," I replied firmly. "The transaction was legitimate, properly documented, and beneficial to all parties involved." Marcus's tone became more cautious. Derek, when we spoke last week, you did not mention that there were proper legal procedures followed or that your parents had independent representation. Derek's confidence began to waver. Well, I did not know about those details at the time, but that does not change the fact that something suspicious is happening here. Actually, it changes quite a lot, Marcus replied. If the transaction was properly executed with independent counsel for both parties, with appropriate appraisals and disclosure periods, then it would be very difficult to challenge on the grounds of elder abuse or financial manipulation. I decided to provide additional information that would further undermine Derek's accusations. The purchase price paid off exactly $47,000 in outstanding debts that were threatening foreclosure. 3 independent appraisals confirmed the fair market value, and my parents maintained their right to live in the property indefinitely. That sounds like a legitimate family financial arrangement, Marcus said carefully. Derek, I think you may have misunderstood the nature of this transaction when you called me last week. Derek was becoming increasingly desperate as his legal strategy collapsed in real time. But what about the secrecy? What about the fact that she hid this from the rest of the family? Privacy in family financial matters is not illegal, Marcus replied. In fact, it is often advisable to keep such transactions confidential to prevent exactly the kind of family conflict you are describing right now. Stephanie was looking more and more uncomfortable as she realized Derek's claims were falling apart under professional scrutiny. Maybe we should think about this more carefully, she suggested quietly. But Derek was too committed to his accusations to back down gracefully. Marcus, I want to hire you to investigate this whole situation. I think there are things we have not discovered yet. There was a long pause before the lawyer responded. Derek, based on what I have heard tonight, I do not think you have grounds for a successful legal challenge. The transaction appears to have been properly executed with appropriate safeguards in place. But surely there must be something we can do, Derek insisted. This cannot be legal. Actually, it sounds entirely legal, Marcus replied. And frankly, attempting to challenge a properly executed real estate transaction without evidence of fraud or coercion could expose you to liability for malicious litigation. The warning hit Derek like a physical blow. Not only was his legal strategy failing, but he was being cautioned that pursuing it further could result in legal consequences for him. I think you should consult with your own attorney before taking any further action, Marcus continued. And Derek, in the future, please make sure you have all the relevant facts before calling me about potential cases. The line went dead, leaving Derek staring at his phone in stunned silence. His attempt to paint me as a financial predator had backfired spectacularly, exposing his own ignorance and reckless accusations. Well, I said quietly, I think that settles the question of whether my property purchase was legitimate. Derek slumped back into his chair, looking defeated for the first time since this confrontation began. But I could see in his eyes that he was not ready to give up completely. Desperate people often make dangerous choices, and I had a feeling Derek's next move would be even more reckless than his failed legal gambit. The silence following Derek's humiliating phone call with his lawyer stretched uncomfortably long. I could see him struggling with the collapse of his accusations while trying to figure out some way to regain control of the situation. Stephanie was studying her manicured fingernails with obvious discomfort, clearly realizing she had hitched herself to a sinking ship. Then I heard a car door slam in our driveway, followed by footsteps on the front porch. Before anyone could react, there was a polite knock at our front door that interrupted the tense atmosphere in our dining room. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, standing up to answer the door. "I believe that is James Harrison, my attorney. I asked him to join us for dessert." Derek's eyes widened with alarm. "You called your lawyer. Why would you need legal representation for a family dinner?" "Because I had a feeling this conversation would eventually require professional clarification," I replied, walking toward the front door, and it seems my instincts were correct. I opened the door to reveal James Harrison, a distinguished man in his mid-50s wearing a dark wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase. He had been my lawyer for 3 years, handling everything from my business sale contracts to the recent property transaction with my parents. "Good evening, Agatha," James said with a warm smile. "I apologize for interrupting your family dinner, but you mentioned this might be an appropriate time to address some questions about the Henderson property transaction." "Perfect timing," I replied, leading him into our dining room where my family was watching with various expressions of curiosity and concern. "James, I believe you remember my parents, Robert and Linda. This is my brother Derek and his girlfriend Stephanie." James nodded politely to everyone before setting his briefcase on our dining room table next to Derek's scattered financial documents. "I understand there have been some questions about the legality and propriety of the property transfer we executed 6 months ago." Derek found his voice, though it came out weaker than before. "We are just trying to understand how all this happened without anyone in the family knowing about it." "Actually," James said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick folder, "quite a few people knew about it. The transaction required involvement from multiple attorneys, real estate professionals, and county officials." He began laying out documents with the systematic precision of someone who had dealt with similar family disputes before. "Let me walk you through the complete timeline and legal framework that govern this property transfer." The first document James produced was a detailed timeline showing every step of the transaction process. On March 20th, Agatha contacted my office requesting advice on how to help her parents avoid foreclosure while preserving their dignity and legal rights. He pointed to specific dates highlighted on the timeline. On March 25th, we arranged for Agatha's parents to receive independent legal counsel from Patterson Rodriguez, an associates, a firm that specializes in representing elderly clients in real estate transactions. Derek interrupted. "Why did they need separate lawyers?" "To prevent exactly the kind of accusations you made earlier this evening," James replied calmly. "When family members engage in significant financial transactions, it is essential that all parties have independent representation to ensure no one is being pressured or manipulated." He pulled out correspondence from the other law firm, showing detailed communications between Robert and Linda's attorney and various real estate professionals. "Your parents' lawyer, Maria Rodriguez, spent considerable time explaining their options and ensuring they understood every aspect of the proposed transaction." On April 15th, James continued, "We commissioned 3 independent property appraisals to establish fair market value for the house." He showed us copies of all 3 appraisals, each one conducted by a different certified appraiser, and each one arriving at similar conclusions about the property's value. The appraisals ranged from $41,500 to $44,800, James explained. Agatha's purchase price of $47,000 actually exceeded the highest appraisal by more than $2,000. Stephanie looked confused. "Why would she pay more than the house was worth?" "Because the goal was not to acquire property at below market rates," James replied. "The goal was to provide exactly enough money to solve your parents' debt crisis while ensuring they received fair compensation for their home." He produced bank records showing how the $47,000 purchase price was distributed directly to creditors on the closing date. Every penny went to paying off outstanding debts. Your parents received no cash from this transaction, but they also walked away completely debt-free. Dad was shaking his head in amazement. "We knew our bills were being paid, but we never understood how comprehensive the solution was." "That was intentional," James said gently. "Agatha specifically requested that we structure the transaction to preserve your privacy and dignity. You were told only what you needed to know to make informed decisions about your own interests." Derek was examining the documents with increasing frustration. "But why all the secrecy? Why not just tell the family what was happening?" James gave him a look that suggested he dealt with difficult family members regularly in his practice. Because experience has taught us that family financial arrangements often become sources of conflict and resentment when too many people are involved in the decision-making process. He pulled out another set of documents that made my stomach drop slightly. In fact, our investigation into your parents' financial situation revealed some irregularities that were quite concerning. The atmosphere in the room shifted as James opened a file marked Confidential Financial Investigation. While reviewing your parents' credit reports and financial history, we discovered several accounts and transactions that raised red flags. Derek's face went pale as James began describing what they had found. Multiple credit card accounts were opened using Robert's social security number and personal information, but the applications contained forged signatures and false income information. James showed us copies of credit applications with signatures that clearly did not match Dad's handwriting. Someone with access to your father's personal information had been opening accounts in his name and using them for purposes that had nothing to do with household expenses or medical bills. We also found evidence of unauthorized electronic transfers from Robert's checking account to various online gambling websites and sports betting platforms. James continued pulling out bank statements with highlighted transactions. Mom gasped as she saw the gambling charges listed on Dad's account statements. Robert never gambles. He thinks it is a waste of money. Exactly, James replied, which is why we conducted a more thorough investigation into how someone gained access to his banking information. Derek was becoming increasingly agitated as the scope of the investigation became clear. Wait a minute. Are you suggesting that someone in this family was stealing from Mom and Dad? I am not suggesting anything, James replied evenly. I am presenting evidence that someone with intimate knowledge of your parents' financial information was engaging in identity theft and unauthorized use of their accounts. He pulled out the most damaging document, a detailed forensic analysis of the fraudulent transactions. The pattern of account access suggests someone who had regular physical access to this house knowledge of where important documents were kept and familiarity with your parents' daily routines. The implications were becoming impossible to ignore. Someone inside our family had been systematically stealing from our parents while they struggled with legitimate medical expenses and financial hardship. The total amount of fraudulent charges and unauthorized transactions was approximately $14,700, James said. This represents nearly one-third of the debt crisis that prompted Agatha's to purchase the house. Derek stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward onto the floor with a loud crash. Are you accusing me of stealing from my own parents? James looked at him with the steady gaze of an attorney who had been practicing law for 30 years. I am presenting factual evidence about financial crimes that were committed against your parents. The identity of the perpetrator is a matter for law enforcement to determine. But you clearly think it was me, Derek said, his voice rising with panic and anger. I think, James replied carefully, that anyone who had access to your parents' personal information and was aware of their financial vulnerabilities should be prepared to answer some very serious questions. James reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder, this one marked with official-looking seals and stamps that immediately caught everyone's attention. During our investigation into the Henderson family's financial irregularities, we were contacted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit. Derek's face went from pale to ashen as James opened the FBI folder and began spreading additional documents across our dining room table. It appears that the identity theft and financial fraud affecting your parents was part of a much larger criminal enterprise. What do you mean by larger criminal enterprise? Stephanie asked, though her voice suggested she was already starting to distance herself from Derek emotionally. I mean that Robert Henderson's stolen personal information was being used to create false identities for money laundering operations connected to illegal gambling networks, James replied matter-of-factly. He showed us printouts of online accounts that had been created using Dad's social security number, home address, and other personal details. Your father's identity was used to open accounts at 17 different online casinos and sports betting websites across 6 states. Dad stared at the documents in horror. I have never even been inside a real casino, let alone gambled online. How is this possible? It is possible because someone with access to your personal information provided it to criminals who specialize in identity theft for financial crimes, James explained. The FBI has been tracking this particular network for 18 months. Derek had been unusually quiet during this revelation, but now he spoke up with obvious desperation. How do you know I had anything to do with this? Anyone could have gotten access to Dad's information. James pulled out a thick stack of bank statements and transaction records. The forensic accounting analysis reveals a very specific pattern. The fraudulent transactions always occurred on days when certain family members were present in the house, and they always happened within hours of legitimate withdrawals from Robert's account. He pointed to highlighted entries that showed a clear correlation between Derek's visits to our parents' house and the subsequent fraudulent activity on Dad's accounts. Someone was monitoring your father's legitimate banking activity and timing the fraudulent transactions to avoid detection. More importantly, James continued, the FBI's investigation revealed that many of the gambling websites being used were operated by the same criminal organization that targets veterans and military families specifically. Mom looked confused. What does that have to do with our situation? Robert is a Vietnam veteran, James explained. These criminals specifically target veterans because military service records are easier to access, and veterans often have disability payments that provide steady income for money laundering purposes. Derek's involvement was becoming clearer with each piece of evidence James presented. The FBI believes that family members or close associates of veterans are recruited to provide insider information about potential targets. He pulled out surveillance photos that made my blood run cold. These photographs were taken outside various gambling establishments in Atlantic City over the past 8 months. The FBI was tracking known associates of the money laundering operation. The photos clearly showed Derek entering and leaving casinos, talking to men who appeared to be much older and more dangerous than the typical recreational gambler. In several images, Derek was shown accepting envelopes or packages from these individuals. "Oh my God," Stephanie whispered, covering her mouth with her hands. "Derek, what did you get involved in?" Derek was shaking his head frantically. "Those pictures do not prove anything. I was gambling, yes, but I was not involved in any criminal conspiracy." "Actually," James said, pulling out transcripts of recorded conversations, the FBI has been monitoring communications between various members of this criminal network. Your voice appears on several recorded phone calls discussing your father's financial information. He showed us excerpts from FBI surveillance transcripts that contain Derek's voice clearly discussing Dad's bank account numbers, social security number, and daily routines. These conversations took place over the past 4 months and provide detailed information about your parents' vulnerability to financial exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming and devastating. Derek had not just been stealing from our parents. He had been providing their personal information to dangerous criminals who use it for large-scale money laundering operations. The gambling debts Derek accumulated were not just personal financial problems, James continued. They were deliberately created by the criminal organization to ensure his continued cooperation in providing veteran information. He showed us records of Derek's gambling losses, which totaled far more than his income from selling cars could possibly cover. The organization allows initial wins to build confidence, then engineers massive losses to create desperation and financial dependence. Once someone owes them significant money they cannot repay. James explained. They are offered opportunities to reduce their debt by recruiting family members or friends who fit specific target profiles. Stephanie stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse from the floor beside her chair. I cannot be part of this. Derek, I had no idea you were involved in something this serious. Stephanie, wait. Derek pleaded, but she was already heading toward the front door. Do not contact me again, she said firmly. I am not going to get dragged into federal criminal charges because of your bad decisions. The front door slammed behind her, leaving Derek alone to face the full weight of the evidence against him. The dining room felt suddenly much smaller and more oppressive. The FBI has been building a case against this organization for over a year. James continued, apparently unconcerned by Stephanie's dramatic exit. They have enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved, including family members, who provided insider information. Derek slumped in his chair, finally seeming to understand that his situation was far more serious than a simple family financial dispute. What happens now? He asked quietly. That depends largely on your willingness to cooperate with federal investigators, James replied. The FBI is more interested in dismantling the criminal organization than prosecuting individual family members who were manipulated into participation. He pulled out a business card for FBI Special Agent Patricia Walsh, who apparently had been waiting for this conversation to take place. Agent Walsh is prepared to offer you immunity from prosecution in exchange for your full cooperation in their ongoing investigation. What kind of cooperation? Derek asked. Complete disclosure of your contacts within the organization, detailed information about their methods and operations, and willingness to participate in controlled interactions that will help them gather additional evidence. James explained that Derek's cooperation could help protect other military families from similar exploitation, while ensuring that the people who had manipulated him faced serious criminal consequences. However, James continued, the offer of immunity requires that you cease all contact with the criminal organization immediately and agree to enter federal witness protection if necessary for your safety. The gravity of Derek's situation was finally sinking in. He was not just facing family embarrassment or financial problems, he was caught up in a federal criminal investigation that could result in serious prison time if he chose not to cooperate. I never meant for any of this to happen, Derek said, his voice breaking with emotion. I just wanted to win back the money I had lost, and they kept saying I could reduce my debts by helping them with some simple background checks. Dad reached across the table and placed his hand on Derek's shoulder. Son, we need to focus on getting you out of this situation safely. The money and the house are not important compared to your life. It was a moment of grace that showed the fundamental love that still existed in our family despite all the pain and betrayal we had experienced. But I also knew that love alone would not be enough to solve the dangerous situation Derek had created for himself and potentially for all of us. Before anyone could respond to Dad's offer of support for Derek, we heard the sound of another car pulling rapidly into our driveway, followed by a car door slamming with unusual force. Through our front window, I could see a woman hurrying up our walkway, carrying what appeared to be overnight bags and holding the hand of a small child. The urgent knocking that followed was not the polite tap of an expected guest. This was the desperate pounding of someone in crisis seeking immediate help or sanctuary. I rushed to open the front door and was shocked to see Derek's ex-wife Sarah standing on our porch, looking frantic and exhausted. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing the kind of casual clothes that suggested she had dressed quickly without concern for appearance. Sarah, I said immediately, stepping aside to let her in. What are you doing here? Is everything okay? Behind her stood 8-year-old Tommy Derek and Sarah's son, clutching a small backpack and looking scared and confused by whatever crisis had brought them to our house on Christmas Eve. Is Derek here? Sarah asked, scanning our hallway with obvious anxiety. I need to talk to him immediately. It is about the people who have been calling and threatening us. Derek appeared in the dining room doorway, his face showing a mixture of surprise and dread. "Sarah, what are you doing here? You were supposed to have Tommy until after New Year's." "I am here because I am terrified," Sarah replied, her voice shaking with emotion. "I am here because dangerous people have been looking for you, and they have started threatening me and Tommy when they cannot find you." She pulled out her phone and began showing us text messages and voicemails that made my blood run cold. The messages contained explicit threats about what would happen to Derek's family if he did not pay his gambling debts immediately. "They know where Tommy goes to school," Sarah said, her voice breaking as she scrolled through increasingly threatening communications. "They sent someone to take pictures of him at recess yesterday." She showed us a photograph that had been texted to her phone Tommy playing on the playground at his elementary school, completely unaware that he was being watched, and photographed by someone with malicious intent. Derek's face went white as he realized the full scope of what his gambling addiction had unleashed on his family. "Sarah, I had no idea they were contacting you. I thought I was keeping you and Tommy out of this." "Keeping us out of it," Sarah replied incredulously. "Derek, they have been calling me for 2 weeks, demanding to know where you are and how much money you have access to. They know about your parents' house. They know about Agatha's business. They even know about Tommy's college savings account." James, who had been quietly observing this reunion, stepped forward with obvious concern. "Mrs. Henderson, how much do these people know about Derek's family members?" "They know everything," Sarah replied, reaching into her purse to pull out a folder of documents and printed emails. "They have detailed financial information about everyone in Derek's family. They know about his parents' medical bills, Agatha's tech company sale, even the fact that Derek has been living back at home." She spread the documents across our already cluttered dining room table, revealing a level of surveillance and information gathering that was genuinely frightening. "This is why I have been staying in hotels with Tommy for the past 10 days, Sarah continued. "They started showing up at my apartment, calling my workplace, even contacting my neighbors, asking questions about Derek and our financial situation." Tommy had been standing silently beside his mother, but now he spoke up in a small, scared voice. "Mom, are the bad men going to hurt Daddy?" Derek knelt down to his son's eye level, his own eyes filling with tears. "No, buddy, Daddy is going to fix this problem. I promise you are going to be safe." But even as he made that promise, I could see the uncertainty in Derek's face. He clearly had no idea how to protect his family from the dangerous people he had become involved with. Sarah pulled out additional documentation that showed the extent of the criminal organization's reach. They told me Derek owes them $32,000, but they also said the debt keeps growing every day because of interest and penalties. She showed us printed emails detailing Derek's gambling activity over the past 8 months, including records of his wins and losses that painted a devastating picture of progressive addiction and manipulation. At first, Derek was winning, Sarah explained. He would come home from Atlantic City with cash and stories about his big scores at the poker tables. "I thought he had finally found something he was good at." Derek looked ashamed as his ex-wife described how his early gambling successes had masked the systematic manipulation he was experiencing. "They let me win for the first 2 months," he admitted. "I thought I had natural talent for poker and sports betting. But then the losses started," Sarah continued, "and they were always much bigger than the wins had been. Derek would lose in one night what he had taken weeks to earn." She showed us credit card statements that documented Derek's desperate attempts to fund his continued gambling as his losses mounted. He maxed out every credit card we had, took cash advances against our car title, even borrowed money from coworkers. The financial destruction had been systematic and devastating, creating the exact kind of desperation that made Derek vulnerable to recruitment by the criminal organization. When Derek could not get any more legitimate credit, they started offering him private loans, Sarah explained. The interest rates were outrageous, but they made it sound like temporary help until his luck turned around. James was taking notes as Sarah described the loan shark operation that had ensnared Derek. These private loans are how they maintain control over their victims. The terms are designed to be impossible to repay through legitimate means. That is when they started asking Derek for help with background research, Sarah continued. They said if he could provide information about potential new clients who might be interested in high-stakes gambling, they would reduce his debt. Derek had been manipulated into becoming a recruiter for the same criminal organization that was systematically destroying his financial life. They specifically wanted information about veterans and military families, Derek admitted. They said those were their preferred clientele. The pattern was becoming clear. Derek's gambling addiction had been deliberately cultivated and exploited to turn him into an inside source of information about potential victims for identity theft and financial fraud. 3 weeks ago, they told Derek his debt had grown to over $30,000, and they wanted it paid immediately, Sarah said. When he could not pay, they started threatening to collect from his family members. She showed us recordings of threatening phone calls that had been left on her voicemail, each one more explicit and frightening than the last. They know where I work, where Tommy goes to school, where his grandparents live, Sarah continued. They have made it clear that Derek's debt is now a family obligation. The realization that our entire family was potentially at risk because of Derek's involvement with these criminals was terrifying and infuriating at the same time. That is why I came here tonight, Sarah concluded. I need Derek to understand that this is not just his problem anymore. These people are dangerous, and they are not going to stop until they get their money or until someone gets seriously hurt. James had been listening intently to Sarah's account of the threats against Derek's family, taking detailed notes, and occasionally asking for clarification about specific incidents or communications. When she finished describing the escalating danger, he closed his notepad and looked directly at Derek with the serious expression of someone about to deliver life-changing information. Derek, what I am about to tell you could save your life and the lives of your family members, James began, but it will require you to make some very difficult decisions tonight. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder, this one marked with federal seals and containing documents that looked far more official than anything we had seen so far. For the past 3 months, my law firm has been working closely with FBI Special Agent Patricia Walsh and the Department of Justice Financial Crimes Unit to build a comprehensive case against the criminal organization you have been involved with. Derek looked confused and frightened. You mean the government has known about my situation this whole time? We have known about your involvement since June, James replied calmly. The FBI has been conducting surveillance on this gambling network for over 18 months, and your name appeared in their investigation as both a victim and a potential witness. He opened the federal folder and began showing us documentation that revealed the true scope of the criminal enterprise Derek had unknowingly joined. This organization operates in 12 states and has defrauded over 300 military families out of approximately $2.7 million, James explained. Your father's stolen identity was just one small piece of a much larger criminal conspiracy. Sarah grabbed Tommy closer to her as she processed the magnitude of what Derek had become involved in. Are you saying this was never really about gambling? That they were running some kind of organized crime operation? The gambling was real, James replied, but it was also a recruitment tool. They identify vulnerable individuals with access to valuable personal information, create gambling addictions to establish financial control, then use that control to force cooperation in identity theft and money laundering schemes. He showed us organizational charts that looked like something from a federal prosecution manual detailing the hierarchy and operations of what was clearly a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Derek's role was to identify potential victims within veteran communities and provide the personal information necessary to create false identities for financial fraud, James continued. But he was also being set up to take the fall if the operation was discovered by law enforcement. Derek's face went pale as he realized how completely he had been manipulated. They were going to blame everything on me. The organization's standard practice is to use family members as expendable assets, James explained. When law enforcement closes in, they eliminate the evidence and let local recruits like Derek face prosecution while the core leadership disappears. He pulled out surveillance photos showing some of the men Derek had been meeting with in Atlantic City. 3 of these individuals are already under federal indictment for similar operations in other states. If you had continued working with them, you would have eventually been arrested as part of their criminal conspiracy. The gravity of Derek's situation was becoming clear to everyone at the table. He had not just been making bad gambling decisions. He had been recruited into a federal criminal enterprise that could result in decades in prison. However, James continued, the FBI is much more interested in dismantling the entire organization than prosecuting individual victims who were manipulated into cooperation. He pulled out a formal-looking document with Department of Justice letterhead. Special Agent Walsh has authorized me to offer you complete immunity from prosecution in exchange for your cooperation in their ongoing investigation. Derek read the immunity agreement with shaking hands. What exactly would I have to do? First, you would need to provide complete and truthful testimony about your recruitment training and activities within the organization, James explained. This includes identifying all your contacts, describing their methods, and detailing every illegal activity you witnessed or participated in. He outlined additional requirements that would be necessary for Derek's protection and the success of the federal investigation. Second, you would need to participate in controlled contacts with organization members to help federal agents gather additional evidence. This would involve wearing recording devices and following specific scripts designed to elicit incriminating statements. Sarah looked terrified by the suggestion that Derek would need to continue interacting with the dangerous people who had been threatening their family. Third, James continued, you would need to relocate immediately with your family to a secure location where federal marshals can ensure your protection during the investigation and trial phases. The mention of witness protection made the seriousness of Derek's situation undeniably clear. These were not just idle threats or minor criminal activity. This was the kind of organized crime that required federal intervention and complete identity changes for victim safety. If I agree to cooperate, Derek asked, what happens to Tommy and Sarah? Do they have to go into witness protection too? That would be their choice, James replied. The federal marshals can provide protection for immediate family members, but it would mean leaving your current lives completely behind until the criminal organization is dismantled and prosecuted. He explained that witness protection would involve new identities, relocation to a different part of the country, and complete severing of ties with friends, extended family, and former communities. The alternative, James said grimly, is that you refuse to cooperate and face federal prosecution for identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that carry a potential sentence of 15 to 25 years in federal prison. He showed Derek the criminal charges that were already being prepared in case he chose not to cooperate. Meanwhile, the criminal organization would continue threatening your family members in an attempt to collect the money you owe them. Derek looked around our dining room at the faces of his family members, all of whom were grappling with the realization that his gambling addiction had created a crisis that could destroy multiple lives. There is one more option, James said, but it carries significant risks and would require cooperation from your entire family. He pulled out a different set of documents that outlined an alternative approach to handling Derek's situation. Instead of immediately entering witness protection, you could work with federal agents to conduct a controlled takedown of the local cell of the criminal organization, James explained. This would involve more intensive surveillance and cooperation, but it might allow you to resolve the situation without completely uprooting your family's lives. Derek looked at Sarah and Tommy, then at our parents, clearly struggling with the magnitude of the decision he was facing. "How long do I have to decide?" Derek asked. "The immunity offer expires in 72 hours, James replied. "After that, federal agents will proceed with prosecution, whether you cooperate or not." He closed the federal folder and looked directly at Derek. "But given the threats against your family that Sarah has described, I would strongly recommend making this decision tonight." The clock on our dining room wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed, marking the passing moments of Derek's last few hours as a free man who could still choose his own destiny. Derek sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity, staring at the immunity agreement in his hands while the weight of his impossible choices pressed down on him. Tommy had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, exhausted by the stress and confusion of their sudden flight from danger. Finally, Derek looked up at James with tears streaming down his face. "I will cooperate," he said quietly. "I cannot let my family pay for my mistakes anymore." "That is the right decision," James replied gently. "But before we proceed, there is additional information about this criminal organization that you need to understand." He pulled out another folder that contained intelligence reports from multiple federal agencies. The scope of their operation is much larger and more disturbing than simple gambling fraud. Derek wiped his eyes and leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "This organization specifically targets military families and veterans for exploitation," James explained, showing us detailed analysis of their victim selection criteria. "They use stolen veteran information not just for identity theft, but to infiltrate military communities and access sensitive information." He showed us reports documenting how the criminal network had used veteran identities to apply for security clearances, access military facilities, and gather intelligence that was then sold to foreign operatives. "Your father's Vietnam service record made him a particularly valuable target," James continued. "Veterans from that era often have medical records, disability payments, and family connections that provide extensive opportunities for information gathering." Robert looked horrified as he realized how his military service had made his entire family vulnerable to exploitation. "They were using my service record to commit espionage." Among other things, James confirmed, the FBI believes this organization has been operating as a front for foreign intelligence services while generating revenue through gambling fraud and identity theft. Derek's face went white as he processed the implications of what he had unknowingly been involved in. "Are you saying I was helping foreign spies?" "You were providing information that was being used for purposes far beyond simple financial fraud," James replied. "The personal details you gathered about veteran families were being compiled into databases that foreign operatives used to target military personnel for recruitment or blackmail." He showed us examples of how stolen veteran information had been used to create false identities that gained access to military installations, defense contractors, and government facilities. The gambling operation was essentially a cover story for a much more sophisticated intelligence gathering network, James explained. Local recruits like Derek were told they were helping with background checks for high-stakes gambling, but the information was actually being used for national security crimes. Sarah looked sick as she realized the true scope of what Derek's involvement could mean for their family's future. "Does this mean we are all considered security risks now?" "Well, it means your cooperation with the federal investigation will be crucial not just for prosecuting financial crimes, but for protecting national security interests," James replied. He outlined the enhanced security measures that would be necessary given the national security implications of Derek's case. The witness protection arrangement will be managed by multiple federal agencies, including the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and Department of Defense security personnel. James explained, "Your protection is a matter of national security, not just criminal justice." Derek was struggling to comprehend how his gambling problem had escalated into a situation involving foreign espionage and national security. "How did I get involved in something this serious without realizing it?" "Because you were specifically recruited and manipulated by professionals who specialize in identifying and exploiting vulnerable individuals," James replied. "This was not accidental. You were targeted because of your family connections to veteran communities." He showed Derek psychological profiles that the criminal organization maintained on their recruits, detailing vulnerabilities and pressure points that could be exploited for continued cooperation. "They knew about your financial struggles, your resentment toward Agatha's success, your parents' medical problems, and your divorce proceedings," James explained. "All of this information was used to create the perfect circumstances for recruitment." Derek realized he had been manipulated from the very beginning, that even his initial gambling wins had been orchestrated to draw him deeper into the organization's web of control. "The good news," James continued, "is that your cooperation will help federal agents dismantle not just a financial fraud operation, but a network that has been threatening national security for several years." He explained that Derek's testimony and evidence could help prosecute dozens of individuals involved in the conspiracy, potentially preventing future attacks on military families and veteran communities. "Your cooperation could protect hundreds of other families from the same exploitation you experienced," James said. "That is something to be proud of, even in the midst of this crisis." Derek looked around our dining room at his family members, all of whom had been inadvertently swept up in the consequences of his poor decisions and criminal manipulation. "I want to do whatever will keep my family safe and help other families avoid what we have been through," Derek said firmly. "When do we start?" James smiled for the first time since arriving at our house. "Special Agent Walsh is waiting outside in an unmarked vehicle. She has been monitoring the situation to ensure your family's safety during this conversation." He pulled out his phone and sent a brief text message. "She will be coming in now to begin the formal cooperation process and arrange for your immediate protection." As if on cue, there was a professional knock at our front door. James went to answer it, returning with a middle-aged woman in a dark suit who carried herself with the unmistakable authority of a federal law enforcement officer. "Good evening, everyone," Agent Walsh said, surveying our dining room with its scattered documents and emotional family members. "I understand we have a lot of work to do tonight." Derek stood up and extended his hand to the FBI agent. "Agent Walsh, I am Derek Henderson. I am ready to tell you everything I know about the organization that has been threatening my family." "That is exactly what I wanted to hear," Agent Walsh replied with a reassuring smile. "Let us get started." 3 hours later, after Agent Walsh had completed her initial interview with Derek and arranged for immediate protection for Sarah and Tommy, our family found ourselves alone together for the first time since this crisis began. The federal agents had departed with Derek, who would be spending the night in a secure facility while they prepared for the next phase of the investigation. The dining room felt strangely quiet without Derek's presence and the mountain of legal documents that had covered our table throughout the evening. Mom had cleared away the remnants of our interrupted Christmas dinner and made fresh coffee for those of us who were too emotionally exhausted to sleep despite the late hour. I was sitting with my arms around Dad, who had been unusually quiet since learning about Derek's involvement with criminals who had specifically targeted our family because of his military service. I could see the guilt weighing heavily on him, as if his decades-old service in Vietnam had somehow made him responsible for the crisis that had nearly destroyed our family. "Dad," I said gently, "none of this was your fault. You served your country with honor, and criminals who exploit that service are the ones who should feel ashamed." He nodded, but I could tell he was still struggling with the knowledge that his personal information had been used to commit crimes against other veteran families. Sarah was sitting in the living room with Tommy, who was finally sleeping peacefully on the sofa despite all the chaos that had surrounded him. She looked exhausted, but relieved to finally be somewhere safe with people who understood what she had been going through. Mom had been unusually quiet throughout Agent Walsh's interview, but now she spoke up with a trembling voice. I need to say something that I probably should have said months ago. She set down her coffee cup and looked directly at me. Agatha, I have known for a long time that you were paying our bills. The admission hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean you knew? I figured it out back in September when the mortgage company called to confirm some payment details, Mom replied. They mentioned the third-party payment service, and I recognized the name from some paperwork I had seen in your room. She pulled out a small notebook that I had never seen before. I have been keeping track of everything you have done for us, trying to understand why you felt you had to help us in secret. The notebook contained months of observations about my behavior, my financial contributions, and the ways I had been quietly taking care of problems they thought they were handling themselves. I also started seeing a therapist 6 weeks ago, Mom continued, because I realized I had been enabling Derek's destructive behavior for years while failing to recognize and appreciate your genuine contributions to this family. Dad looked surprised. Linda, you never told me you were seeing a counselor. I wanted to understand my own role in creating the family dynamics that led to this crisis, Mom replied. I needed professional help to recognize how I had been unconsciously favoring Derek and taking your kindness for granted, Agatha. She showed us pages from her notebook where she had been documenting patterns of family interaction instances where she had failed to defend me from Derek's criticism and ways she had inadvertently reinforced his sense of entitlement. The therapist helped me understand that I was so focused on trying to fix Derek's problems that I ignored the fact that you were quietly solving everyone else's problems, Mom said to me. She had been working through exercises designed to help her recognize and change the enabling behaviors that had allowed Derek to become increasingly demanding and manipulative over the years. I also realized that I have been struggling with depression since your father's heart attack, Mom continued. The financial stress and health scare made me retreat emotionally, which left you to handle responsibilities I should have been sharing. Dad reached across the space between their chairs to take Mom's hand. Honey, why did you not tell me you were having such a hard time? Because you were dealing with your own recovery and health problems, Mom replied. I thought I needed to be strong for everyone else, but instead, I just became passive and let family problems escalate without addressing them. She showed us therapy homework assignments, where she had been practicing setting boundaries with Derek and expressing appreciation for the family members who were actually contributing positively to our household. One of the most important things I learned, Mom said looking directly at me, is that by not acknowledging your help openly, I was denying you the recognition and gratitude you deserved, while also preventing Derek from understanding how much you were actually doing for this family. The insight was painful, but accurate. Derek's perception that I was a freeloader living off our parents' generosity had been reinforced by the family's silence about my actual financial contributions. I should have defended you when Derek criticized your living situation, Mom continued. I should have made it clear to everyone that you were not taking advantage of anyone, but rather that you were taking care of all of us. Dad was nodding as he processed what Mom was sharing. I think I made some of the same mistakes. I was so grateful for your help that I did not want to risk embarrassing you by acknowledging it publicly, but that left Derek with completely wrong impressions about our family's financial situation. I could see that both of my parents had been carrying guilt about their roles in creating the circumstances that allowed Derek's manipulation and criminal involvement to escalate unchecked. The therapist also helped me understand that Derek's gambling addiction was probably a way of trying to prove himself financially after feeling overshadowed by your business success, Mom said. But instead of addressing those feelings directly, I just tried to avoid family conflict by not talking about money at all. She had been learning about addiction dynamics and the ways that family members can inadvertently enable destructive behaviors by avoiding confrontation or accountability. Moving forward, Mom said, I want our family to have honest conversations about money expectations and responsibilities. No more secrets, no more avoiding difficult topics, and no more enabling behavior that prevents people from facing the consequences of their choices. Dad squeezed Mom's hand. I think that sounds like a healthy approach. I also want to be more involved in family financial decisions instead of leaving everything to you women to figure out. We spent the next hour talking openly about family dynamics, financial arrangements, and the ways we could support each other more effectively going forward. It was the kind of honest conversation we should have been having for years, but it had taken a crisis to finally break through the patterns of avoidance and miscommunication that had been building up in our family. By the time we were ready for bed, I felt like we had laid the foundation for a much healthier family relationship built on honesty, mutual respect, and clear communication, rather than assumptions and unspoken expectations. 6 months had passed since that terrible Christmas Eve when Derek's criminal involvement had nearly destroyed our family. Agent Walsh had kept us informed about the progress of the federal investigation, and Derek's cooperation had indeed led to the arrest of 17 people involved in the identity theft and espionage network. The criminal organization had been completely dismantled with several key leaders facing decades in federal prison. Derek himself was doing well in the witness protection program. He had been relocated to a small city in Oregon, where he was working as a construction supervisor under his new identity. More importantly, he had been attending intensive gambling addiction counseling and seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding his life on a foundation of honesty and hard work. Sarah and Tommy had chosen to join Derek in witness protection, and their reports suggested that the family was slowly healing from the trauma of the past year. Tommy was thriving in his new school, and Sarah had found work as a teacher in their new community. I was thinking about Derek's recovery as I sat in our newly renovated kitchen reviewing architectural plans for the final phase of our home renovation project. The house had been transformed over the past months, but not in the way Derek and Stephanie had originally envisioned. Instead of the sterile modern aesthetic Stephanie had promoted, we had chosen renovations that honored the home's history while making it more functional for our growing family's needs. The kitchen renovation had opened up the space between the kitchen and dining room, but we had preserved the original hardwood floors and restored the vintage light fixtures that gave the rooms their character. Dad walked into the kitchen carrying a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper, moving with much more energy than he had shown since his heart attack. His recovery had been remarkable, aided by the elimination of financial stress and the installation of a home gym in our finished basement, where he could do his cardiac rehabilitation exercises. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of my head as he sat down at our new kitchen island. "How are you feeling today?" I placed my hand on my rounded belly where my daughter had been actively kicking for the past hour. At 7 months pregnant, I was beginning to feel the physical challenges of carrying a child, but the emotional joy of impending motherhood had filled me with a sense of purpose and contentment I had never experienced before. "She is definitely awake," I said, laughing as another strong kick reminded me of her presence. "I think she is going to be a soccer player." Marcus had been incredible throughout my pregnancy, attending every doctor's appointment and reading every parenting book he could find. Our relationship had deepened considerably as we prepared to become parents together, and he had proposed 3 months ago with a beautiful vintage ring that perfectly matched my personal style. "Has Marcus left for the office already?" Dad asked. He had an early meeting with investors for the new cybersecurity company, I replied, but he promised to be home by lunch so we can finish setting up the nursery. The nursery had been created by converting the small guest bedroom adjacent to my childhood room, which Marcus and I had transformed into our master suite. The renovation had allowed us to create a beautiful family space while ensuring that Mom and Dad maintained their privacy and independence in their own wing of the house. Mom appeared in the kitchen doorway carrying a laundry basket full of freshly washed baby clothes. She had thrown herself into grandmother preparations with an enthusiasm that had surprised all of us, knitting blankets and booties while reading child development books and taking infant care classes at the local hospital. "I finished washing all the newborn outfits," she said, setting the basket on the counter. "I still cannot believe how tiny these clothes are. It is hard to imagine a person small enough to fit into them." The transformation in Mom's emotional state had been remarkable to witness. Her depression had lifted significantly once our family financial stress was eliminated, and she began addressing her mental health proactively. She was taking medication prescribed by her doctor and continuing with therapy sessions that had helped her develop much healthier coping strategies. "The crib should be delivered this afternoon," Dad said, consulting his notes about the day's schedule. "Marcus and I are planning to assemble it after he gets home from work." The collaboration between Dad and Marcus had been one of the most unexpected positive developments of the past year. They had bonded over home improvement projects and business discussions, creating a genuine friendship that had enriched both of their lives. "I have been thinking," I said, looking at both of my parents, "about how much has changed since last Christmas." It was impossible not to reflect on the dramatic contrast between our current peaceful family life and the crisis that had nearly torn us apart. The house felt completely different now, filled with love and anticipation rather than tension and secrecy. "I keep thinking about Derek," Mom said quietly. "I wonder if he is happy in his new life." We had received a letter from Derek just 2 weeks ago, forwarded through the Federal Marshal's secure mail system. He had written about his progress in counseling, his satisfaction with honest work, and his gratitude for the second chance our family had given him, despite his terrible mistakes. "He sounded genuinely committed to making positive changes," I said, and Agent Walsh told us that his testimony has helped protect dozens of other families from the same kind of exploitation. Dad nodded. "I think Derek needed to hit rock bottom before he could start rebuilding his life on a solid foundation. The witness protection program might have been the best thing that ever happened to him." "I just hope Tommy is adjusting well to all the changes," Mom said. "Children are resilient, but he has been through so much disruption." Sarah's most recent letter had been encouraging on that front. Tommy was excelling academically and had made close friends in his new community. More importantly, he was no longer showing signs of the anxiety and fear that had characterized his behavior during the months when his family was being threatened. Speaking of children," I said, pulling out a folder of documents I had been reviewing that morning, "I have something I want to share with both of you." I had been waiting for the right moment to reveal some information that would significantly impact our family's long-term financial security and our ability to provide for my daughter's future. While organizing paperwork for our insurance policies, I discovered something interesting about the property deed that I did not realize when I purchased the house. I showed them copies of the original property survey and mineral rights documentation that had been included in our real estate transaction. It turns out that when I bought the house, I also acquired all mineral rights to the property. I said, spreading out geological survey maps that had been commissioned for my new tech company's environmental research project. Dad leaned over to examine the technical documents. "What kind of minerals are we talking about?" "Lithium," I replied, unable to suppress my excitement. "There are significant lithium deposits beneath our property that are valuable for battery manufacturing and renewable energy storage." The geological survey had been conducted as part of an environmental impact study for my new company's data center project, but the results had revealed valuable mineral resources that no one had suspected existed in our neighborhood. "How significant are we talking about?" Mom asked. "Significant enough that mining companies have already started contacting me about leasing agreements," I replied, showing them preliminary offers from 3 different extraction companies. The potential royalty payments would provide substantial passive income for decades to come, ensuring that our family would never again face the kind of financial crisis that had nearly cost us our home. "This means Emma will have her college education fully funded before she is even born," I said, placing my hand on my belly again. "And you will both have complete financial security for the rest of your lives." Dad's eyes filled with tears as he processed what this discovery meant for our family's future. "Your mother and I will never have to worry about being a financial burden on you or Emma." "You could never be a burden," I replied firmly, "but it is wonderful to know that we will all have the resources we need to live comfortably and pursue the things that matter most to us." The mineral rights discovery felt like the universe's way of rewarding our family for surviving the crisis that had tested our bonds and ultimately made us stronger. 1 year after Derek's departure, our family gathered around the same dining room table where the confrontation had taken place, but this time we were celebrating Emma's first Christmas. My 3-month-old daughter was sleeping peacefully in her carrier, blissfully unaware of the dramatic family history that had shaped the circumstances of her birth. The house looked completely different than it had the previous year. The renovation project had been completed beautifully, creating a warm and functional family home that honored its history while meeting our modern needs. The dining room walls now displayed 3 generations of family photos, including recent pictures of Derek, Sarah, and Tommy in their new life. Mom was bustling around the kitchen preparing Christmas dinner with the enthusiasm of someone who had rediscovered her love of cooking and entertaining. Her recovery from depression had been remarkable, and she had channeled her renewed energy into creating beautiful holiday traditions for Emma's first Christmas. Dad was sitting in his favorite chair reading a Christmas story to Emma, even though she was too young to understand the words. His health had continued to improve dramatically, and his cardiologist had declared him to be in the best physical condition he had achieved since his heart attack. Marcus was helping Mom with dinner preparations while fielding phone calls from investors who were excited about our new renewable energy company. The business venture had grown rapidly, fueled by the success of our environmental technology patents and the mineral rights income that provided us with substantial development capital. I was reviewing correspondence from our family lawyer, including updates about the federal prosecution of Derek's former criminal associates. The final trials had concluded successfully, with all major figures in the organization receiving lengthy prison sentences. Derek's cooperation had been instrumental in securing convictions that would protect countless other families from similar exploitation. "I have some news to share," I announced, setting down the legal documents. "We received word from Agent Walsh that Derek's witness protection restrictions are being lifted earlier than expected." The news brought immediate smiles to everyone's faces. Derek's safety had required complete communication isolation for the first year, but the successful prosecution of his former criminal contacts meant that the family could now resume limited contact. "Does that mean we can see Tommy?" Mom asked hopefully. "It means Derek, Sarah, and Tommy can visit us here for Easter if they choose to," I replied. "The federal marshals have determined that the threat level has been reduced to the point where family visits can be safely arranged." Dad wiped tears from his eyes as he processed the possibility of seeing his grandson again. Tommy's absence had been one of the most difficult aspects of the whole crisis, and the prospect of rebuilding their relationship was deeply meaningful to him. Derek sent a letter specifically asking if he could introduce Tommy to his new baby cousin. I continued showing them Derek's handwritten note expressing his desire to rejoin the family circle. The letter had been filled with expressions of remorse for his past behavior and gratitude for the family's forgiveness and support during his recovery process. Derek's tone suggested genuine personal growth and a mature understanding of the pain his addiction and criminal involvement had caused. "I also have news about the mineral rights situation," Marcus said, joining our conversation from the kitchen. "The mining company has finalized their extraction timeline and royalty payment schedule." The lithium mining operation would begin in 18 months, with initial royalty payments projected to exceed $200,000 annually for the first decade of extraction. The long-term financial projections suggested that Emma would inherit a substantial trust fund that would provide her with complete educational and financial freedom. More importantly, Marcus continued, the mining company has agreed to fund a veteran support foundation that will help military families avoid the kind of financial exploitation that Derek experienced. The foundation would provide financial counseling, addiction treatment, and legal assistance specifically for veteran families who had been targeted by criminal organizations. Derek had requested that his cooperation with the foundation's development be part of his ongoing recovery process. "It feels like everything has come full circle," Mom said, looking around our beautifully renovated dining room. "This time last year, we thought our family was falling apart. Now we are stronger than we have ever been." Dad nodded gently, stroking Emma's tiny hand as she slept. "I keep thinking about how differently things could have turned out if Agatha had not been quietly taking care of all of us. The important thing is that we all learn to communicate more honestly and support each other more effectively," I replied. "Derek's crisis forced us to confront problems we had been avoiding for years." Marcus sat down beside me and took my hand. "I am constantly amazed by your family's ability to heal and grow stronger through adversity. Emma is lucky to be born into this kind of love and resilience." As if responding to the sound of her father's voice, Emma stirred in her carrier and opened her bright blue eyes. She looked around at the faces surrounding her with the alert curiosity that had characterized her personality since birth. "Hello, beautiful girl," I said, lifting her out of the carrier and settling her in my arms. "Are you ready to hear about your first Christmas?" Emma made soft, cooing sounds as I carried her to the window where we could see snow beginning to fall on the garden that would someday be her playground. The view encompassed not just our property, but the neighborhood where multiple generations of our family had built lives and created memories. "This is your home," I told her quietly, "and these are the people who will always love and protect you. You are part of a family that has learned how to overcome challenges together and create something beautiful from even the most difficult circumstances." Marcus joined us at the window, wrapping his arms around both Emma and me as we watched the snow transform our familiar landscape into something magical and new. "Next Christmas," he said, "she will be walking around this house, getting into everything and making her own memories." The thought filled me with joy and anticipation for all the family celebrations and milestones that lay ahead. Emma would grow up in a house filled with love, financial security, and the knowledge that her family had overcome serious challenges together. 2 years later, I found myself standing in the same spot by our dining room window, holding 18-month-old Emma as she pointed excitedly at the colorful Christmas lights decorating our front yard. She had indeed become the walking, exploring toddler Marcus had predicted, filling our house with laughter and the joyful chaos that comes with an active young child. "Well, lights, Mama, pretty lights," Emma said in her developing vocabulary, clapping her hands with delight at the holiday display Dad had spent weeks perfecting for her enjoyment. The past year had brought wonderful changes to our family. Derek, Sarah, and Tommy had been able to visit 3 times, gradually rebuilding relationships that had been strained by years of addiction and criminal involvement. Derek looked healthier and more peaceful than I had seen him since childhood, and his commitment to recovery remained strong. Tommy, now 10 years old, had adjusted remarkably well to his new life and had formed a special bond with Emma during their visits. Watching him gently help his baby cousin with toys and games had shown me that the trauma he had experienced had not damaged his capacity for love and family connection. The Veteran Support Foundation, funded by our mining royalties, had already helped 43 military families avoid financial exploitation, similar to what Derek had experienced. Derek's ongoing work with the foundation, sharing his story, and helping other addiction recovery efforts had given his life new purpose and meaning. Our renewable energy company had grown beyond our wildest projections, creating jobs for over 200 people and contributing to sustainable technology development that would benefit future generations. The success had allowed Marcus and me to establish college scholarships specifically for children from military families, ensuring that Emma's good fortune would create opportunities for other young people. But perhaps the most meaningful change had been the deepening of family bonds that had been tested by crisis and emerged stronger than ever. Mom and Dad were thriving in their roles as grandparents, and their financial security allowed them to focus on creating memories with Emma rather than worrying about basic survival. "Emma, do you want to help Grandpa hang the special ornament on the tree?" Dad called from the living room, where he was adding finishing touches to the most elaborate Christmas tree our family had ever assembled. The special ornament was a custom-made piece featuring a photo of our entire family, including Derek, Sarah, and Tommy from their most recent visit. It had become the centerpiece of our holiday decorating ritual, symbolizing the family unity that had been rebuilt through honesty, forgiveness, and mutual support. As I carried Emma toward the living room, my phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. He sent regular updates about his life and recovery progress, maintaining the open communication that had become a cornerstone of our family's healing process. "Sarah and I wanted to thank you again for the Christmas gifts," his message read. "Tommy has not stopped talking about the art supplies you sent, and the books you chose for him are perfect for his reading level. We are so grateful to be part of this family again." The message continued with news about Derek's promotion to regional supervisor at his construction company and his completion of a 2-year addiction recovery milestone. His new employer had been so impressed with his work ethic and leadership skills that they were sponsoring him for additional management training. "We are planning to visit for Emma's 2nd birthday in March," Derek wrote. "Tommy has been working on a special song to sing for her, and Sarah is knitting a blanket for her big girl bed transition." I smiled as I read the message, remembering how impossible such normal family interactions had seemed during the darkest days of Derek's criminal involvement. The transformation in his life demonstrated the power of genuine accountability, professional help, and family support to overcome even the most serious personal crises. "Look, Emma," I said, showing her the photo ornament as Dad held it up to the tree. "There is Uncle Derek and Aunt Sarah and your big cousin Tommy." Emma pointed at the photo with recognition, having heard their names frequently and seen pictures of them throughout her short life. Despite the geographical distance and complicated history, she understood these people as part of her extended family circle. Marcus emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of hot chocolate topped with marshmallows, a holiday tradition he had created specifically for Emma's enjoyment. "I have been thinking about Derek's message," he said, "and I think this might be the right time to tell Emma the story of how our family learned to stick together through difficult times." I looked at my beautiful daughter, who was too young to understand complex family history, but old enough to benefit from simple lessons about love, forgiveness, and the importance of helping people we care about. "Emma," I said, settling into my favorite armchair with her on my lap, "would you like to hear a story about how families can help each other solve problems?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, always eager for storytelling time with her parents and grandparents. "Once upon a time," I began, "there was a family who loved each other very much, but they had forgotten how to talk to each other about important things." I told her a simplified version of our family's crisis and recovery, emphasizing themes of honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to ask for help when facing problems too big to handle alone. The most important lesson, I concluded, is that families who love each other can overcome any challenge by being truthful, supporting each other, and never giving up on the people they care about. Emma listened attentively occasionally, pointing at family members mentioned in the story and making connections between the narrative and the people she knew and loved. As I finished the story, I realized that the lessons we had learned through our crisis would serve as the foundation for the values I wanted to instill in my daughter. Emma would grow up understanding that love requires both boundaries and forgiveness, that financial security comes from honest work and wise planning, and that family loyalty means helping people become their best selves rather than enabling their destructive behaviors. Emma said, snuggling closer to me. Family helps. Yes, sweetheart, I replied, kissing the top of her head. Family helps each other, and that is what makes us strong. Looking around our warm, beautifully decorated living room, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment of peace and security. The house that Derek had once tried to claim through manipulation had become a true family home built on foundations of honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The mineral wealth beneath our property would provide Emma with opportunities I could never have imagined. But more importantly, she would inherit the knowledge that families can survive and thrive through even the most challenging circumstances when they commit to facing problems together with courage and love. As we sat together, watching Emma play with her Christmas presents while snow fell outside our windows, I understood that the greatest gift we could give her was not financial security or educational opportunities, but the confidence that comes from belonging to a family that had tested its bonds and found them unbreakable. The crisis that had nearly destroyed us had ultimately revealed our capacity for forgiveness, growth, and transformation. Derek's journey from addiction and criminal involvement to recovery and redemption had shown us all that people can change when they receive appropriate support and hold themselves accountable for their choices. Our story had begun with betrayal and ended with healing, started with secrets, and concluded with honesty, moved from financial crisis to abundance, and transformed family dysfunction into a foundation of strength that would benefit future generations. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between protecting yourself and helping a family member who was making destructive decisions? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how families can balance love with accountability. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more real-life family stories, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing about second chances and family healing. Thank you for listening to our journey, and I hope your own family relationships are filled with the same kind of honest love and mutual support that carried us through our darkest days to this beautiful new beginning.